Hi, my name is Jassi. Generally, हम Big FM पर शाम को मिलते हैं. Monday to Saturday, 5 to 9, I host the evening show for Big FM. But these are very, very difficult times, unprecedented times. And that's why हम ऐसे भी मिल रहे हैं, नए नए तरीकों से मिल रहे हैं, new mediums getting used to. And this is a very, very important chat because while you and I are in lockdown, there are many, many people जिनके लिए ये lockdown एक जेल जैसा बन गया है because they are victims of domestic abuse and domestic violence. और ये बहुत ही vulnerable situation है जहाँ पे this isolation makes them even more vulnerable to such abuse and such difficult treatment. On the other side of the screen with me is Dr. Samir Parikh. Hi, Dr. Samir. Very, very happy to talk to you. And I think you'll be the best person to answer a lot of questions. Dr. Parikh is Director, Mental Health and Behavioural Sciences, Fortis Healthcare, Fortis Memorial Research Institute. सबसे पहले तो यही पूछूंगी, Dr. Parikh, I hope you're fit, fine and healthy these days. ये सबसे important सवाल है.
Yes, one day at a time. One day at a time is my mantra. That अभी का करो, रोज एक दिन निकालो, ज़्यादा दूर का मत सोचो. Just be safe, sound, healthy, positive, productive every day.
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, World Health Organization की report कहती है कि हर 3 में से एक महिला, 1 out of every 3 women are handling in some way or the other, have been a victim of this domestic violence. And that's why there are a series of questions जो हम इस panel में लेने वाले हैं, जो बहुत से आप लोगों की तरफ से आए हैं. This will help create more awareness, answer a lot of questions, and you can also go out and help others. So first question, Dr. Parikh, यही है कि domestic abuse also includes emotional abuse. And what does this emotional abuse involve? लोगों को ये clarity नहीं होती है. And how should one identify that one is actually going through this abusive relationship in their own life?
See, I think one needs to understand that what is a relationship? A relationship should ideally give you a feeling of togetherness, a feeling of equality. You should feel that you have a relationship should have adequate, positive, good moments.
Yeah.
And if there are difficult moments, the two of you are able to resolve them.
Yeah.
And there is mutual respect, dignity. Now, any form of transgression, whether it is in the aggressive form or neglected form, both transgressions are forms of abuse.
Yeah.
So abuse is not merely physical abuse, which is obvious, which everybody understands.
Yeah.
There is verbal abuse. But then there is also neglect as a form of abuse. So denying basic needs, denying social support, denying stimulation is also a form of abuse, right? Over criticism, hurting the self-esteem, whether it is body image, whether it is the work an individual does, whether it is the personality, any form of this bombardment of negativity, whether it comes in action, physically, verbally, emotionally, all of that is essentially a form of abuse. And if one individual feels that there is a transgression of boundary happening, or feels suffocation or pressure, or feels that the fulfillment is not there in the relationship, and one is there out of compulsions, and one has to just bear the brunt of the relationship, I think that's the aspect of abuse that needs to be understood. Because invariably, when you talk about domestic abuse, the first picture or the only picture that comes to people's mind is physical aggression.
True. Also, women who have experienced this kind of domestic violence or who are, experiencing this abuse, they are at a higher risk of experiencing a lot of mental health issues also. So how does domestic violence affects a woman's mental well-being?
So try and understand this for a moment. Let's take gender out of the picture. Let's just understand trauma and violence. So you may be a child, you may be a war veteran, you may be a victim of violence roadside, you may be of a victim of any other form of violence that has happened. Violence in itself is traumatic.
Mm.
The individual, while being exposed to violence, feels helpless,
Yep.
feels uh, threatened.
Mm.
The trauma makes you fear for your own well-being.
Mm.
It's an extremely, not just physically painful, but emotionally destroying experience. It's like going, and then for a lot of these people, they tend to have recollections in the future. You keep reminded, it could be in dreams, it could be in visualizations, it could be you've passed a street that makes you remind of the incident. It might be an ad, it might be a song. So you have multiple recollections,
Mm.
which keeps you very hyper aroused, very easily over alert situation that, सुई के गिरने से भी आप एकदम से डर जाते हो. Something affects people's sleep, appetite. It affects your mood, gives you a lot of anxiety. It also has an impact on your relationships because you start looking at your trust gets impacted. Uh, you may struggle to have meaningful relationships. It may affect your productivity, work, academics based on your age group. All of that can happen. So people who've gone through domestic violence or women who've gone through violence, you're looking at a very high prevalence of post-traumatic stress disorder, high comorbidity of depressive illnesses, disorders, a lot many more problems in terms of significant relationships, problems in trying to have trust, feeling what we call as a sense of learned helplessness.
Mm.
That the world is not a just place. Dunya aisi hai,
Mm.
right? And that helplessness gets into you, destroys the person's self-esteem,
Mm.
and essentially the individual's ability to make decisions, make choices,
Mm.
be able to have a productive life, that really gets compromised. So it's not about the cross section of an incident happening at that moment in a given moment of time. लेकिन बहुत जरूरी है इस बात को समझना.
Yeah.
That it's not that you would say that, in my 70 years of life, somebody, I had a violent episode for a few seconds. It's not like that.
Yeah.
Those few seconds impact the rest of your life.
Yeah.
That is the impact of violence. And of course, when it happens in your domestic space, in your personal space, which typically for all of us is our safest place.
Yes.
Schools, workplace, home. There is nothing more safer than that. So if you are feeling threatened in your safest place, then imagine how anxious, how worried, how preoccupied throughout you would be. Because if I'm not safe within the confines of my own walls, how do I feel safe in public? How do I feel safe going to work? It's this component that needs to be understood. There are multiple ramifications.
True.
Most people who've gone through violence would have a very high prevalence of mental health issues. This is a reality that one needs to very sensitively understand.
Also, domestic abuse survivors, like we just spoke, are at a serious, risk of, suffering from a mental illness or, facing depression or facing anxiety. So, what do you have to say in general about that statement when you meet patients? How many times is this illness you can connect it back to a domestic issue, or a situation of violence back home?
See, it's important that we keep diseases as a separate category because diseases typically have multiple etiological factors. Biopsychosocial model is what is for mental health, the imbalance, psychological factors, social system, stressors, all of that put together. Now, when you look at mental health ailments, rather than looking at mental health disorders per se, look at the mental health aspect of domestic abuse. I mentioned it. You are looking at safe place, so you're violated in your safe place. The abuse is done by somebody whom you trust. So your violence is happening from a trustworthy source. On top of that, that source is not going anywhere. It's not that you were walking on the road and somebody was trying to snatch something and you were
Yeah.
hit and you know it was a coincidence and you can have all the defenses that you can use. But how do you use the defense when the perpetrator is right in front of you? So what is happening is that you end up living in fear of the next episode happening.
Yeah.
The next trigger happening. And invariably, a lot of people internalize it. They feel my behavior in some way is bringing the abuse. So
Yeah.
if I do the things right, I will not be abused, you know? And that's what happens. It's almost very similar to a version of the Stockholm syndrome that you are the aggressor. And after a while, I start seeing things from your point of view. And I think you are right. And almost as though it's okay for what's happening. And it's that kind of impact, the deep impact on the psyche that domestic violence does.
And what is a psychiatrist's role in, detection or intervention of domestic abuse? Does that happen? Can that happen? Is there a role?
Yes, there is a role, but I think that role. Okay, so I think broadly you're looking at two, maybe three kinds of roles. One role would be that all of us need to work in prevention, like the conversation you and I are having now.
Yeah.
Right? You come from media, I come from healthcare.
Yeah.
So we are both interacting, and then there is a brand that comes that takes this message to the world.
Yes.
So you have essentially like-minded people together to
Yes.
create awareness. So
Yes.
one role is the preventive role, right? You use your power as an influencer. The brand uses its reach. I am giving you the mental health component, hoping that some people are able to see through it. Some people are able to be affected by it. Some people would feel that, okay, I need to change. So that's one component, which is creating awareness. Okay. Second component is if people come to us, then helping them deal with it, with the goal being that the impact of the abuse should not affect long-term life, or the effect could be as minimized as we could be. Whether we do it with medications, if there are depression, anxiety, insomnia also happening, whether we do it without medications, where a psychologist would do counseling and support, we bring the family together, find the person support systems, ensure there is a support system happening. Broadly, that's where the role is. But I think what we need to understand that it's not the expertise or expert component, which is the key component about domestic abuse. One needs to understand if perpetrators of violence don't stop violence, however much you work in the aftermath, you are now still using scotch tape, right? The scars are going to be there. So my take on this is more as from the social psych point of view and less from a biological psychiatry point of view. Because once you had PTSD post domestic violence, I can do scotch tape. But how do we figure a way that that incident in the first place shouldn't have happened?
Yeah.
Right? And that I think is beyond individuals and experts. I think that's where the collective role of the society comes, where we need to find a way to make our support systems effective.
I totally agree with you. I think it's a very deep, fundamental issue, and it can only be addressed, like that on a very core level. I agree with you. If you have to stop it, it has to, be ingrained in the way we are raised, the way we are, the way we learn about each other, the way we are told about, respecting each other. I understand that part
See,
completely.
look at the bystander apathy. I'll bring bystander apathy to this context just to give you a perspective. Let's say you are going in a public transport. There are 100 people sitting in the bus. And there is one idiot who is misbehaving with one person. 98 other people sitting there look the other way, the bystander's apathy towards the experience one person's having. Look at the impact it's doing. The individual feels helpless.
Yeah.
Individual thinks that the society is not going to support me, which means I have to just learn to accept it as a way of life.
Yeah. Yeah.
The perpetrator feels empowered.
Empowered, yeah, absolutely.
Would probably now continue to have a pattern. But if those 98 people would have together stood up and said no, what are the odds? Similarly, in domestic violence, if the support systems, the friends, the parents, the siblings, the children, the neighbors, the colleagues, that's a significant influencer system. If that influencer system gives the victim the confidence, we are with you, the decision making becomes different. And when the perpetrator sees the support system and the rejection of the perpetrator's behavior, that also has an impact. And then you need the legal support happening. When you have zero tolerance towards violence, a society, civilization cannot tolerate violence.
Absolutely. It's very sad, actually. It can completely rob a person of everything. Yeah, I mean, I totally understand, and I cannot imagine how, like, without a support system or without a strong, will also, strong individual will also, to be able to find that self back, self-esteem, and with the right kind of support, it can become.
I think it comes down to support. I mean, I know will is the right word. I know I'm not going to take it away from the narrative, but I just feel the will also ends up giving a little bit extra connotation to what the victim could do. And I for the victim. I refuse to let even an ounce given to what the victim can do. We have to create a system. Perpetrator has to be stopped. The system needs to be robust. Then let's talk about the will, and then let's talk about the revival and the survivors, right? But you can't take the context away. And the context lies in that particular incident where inequality and power dynamics, helplessness and violence take place.
True. Also, my next question is how these abusive relationships impact children. And like you were just talking about bullying, bullying itself is like, a war in miniature. It's absolutely cruel, I feel. Right from school, I see it happening even in society, in offices, and I feel at all levels, it has to be condemned and stopped. But apart from bullying, these abusive, parent relationships, how are they impacting children each day, every day?
I mean, see, this one's an obvious one. A child needs a conducive environment. A child needs positive joy, pleasure. Relationships between the parents is one of the important criteria for a better life for the child in terms of personality, confidence, self-esteem, social relationships, academic performance, success. A bad relationship, which means that home stops being a pleasant space, which means there is constant stress and fear at home. So that even adds on to the already ongoing distress that's there for them. There is enough evidence to suggest that children brought up in violent atmospheres end up having a lot more aggression, have a lot more self-esteem issues, have not the easiest time with social relationships, and they struggle in their life academically and otherwise. School dropout rates are higher, in fact, worldwide, where there is violence at home.
Okay, Dr. Samir, अभी कोई घर पर जो है, how can they handle stress? Maybe some easy things that they can do, some steps, something that they can follow. And also, if somebody around us is at a risk, how do we offer support?
Two different things. How do we offer support? Let's first look at that. I think what we should not do comes first. We should not victimize. We should not blame the victim. Should not put the onus on the victim. We should not in any which way let the victim feel that in any which way could be their fault. We should be non-judgmental. We should keep the discrimination and stereotypy out of it. Yes, but be there in an empathetic, non-judgmental manner. When it comes to dealing with stress is same for all of us. The right work-life balance, physical activity, social support system, some recreation, some breaks, problem solving attitude, being willing to seek help. Put all of that together, enjoy life, make others enjoy life around you. That's the only mantra for stress management.
Absolutely. Just one last question. Have you ever experienced an abuser seeking help from you? And is it possible to seek therapy to treat these abusive tendencies and behavior? When one starts sometimes realizing that maybe I need help and I have been of trouble to others in the family or others in the domestic setup.
So I think as an individual, what an individual's experiences does not really speak much about understanding this conceptually or science. But yes, there would be some people who may at different junctures of their life develop some empathy maybe, or some sense of responsibility or some need to change. It could be triggered by a variety of things. Could be the potential threat of losing your partner, could be to do with children, could be to do with some other support systems, could be with some insight that develops by their own selves. So yes, people do sometimes go to seek help as well, but by and large, the number would typically be low.
Thank you so much, Dr. Samir. I think this campaign itself is going to really, the very name isolated, not alone. The idea is to create the kind of support system, and I'm hopeful that this talk will help many people have the kind of understanding they need to develop with respect to domestic violence and how we can be of support to anyone and everyone around us. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Thank you.